Thank you for attending the Cost of Bad CX webinar. My name is Suzanne Lentz, and I'm a partner at LiquidHub, a customer engagement company that solves complex challenges through a combination of business design and technology. Understanding the cost of bad CX and how to get CX initiatives supported for your company is important to us at LiquidHub. I'll be co-presenting today with Maxie Schmidt, our principal analyst of Forrester Research serving CX professionals. Maxie leads Forrester's research on CX measurement and writes about making the business case for CX.
Thank you for having me, Suzanne.
You're welcome. Looking forward to this, Maxie. As Steve Jobs said, you've got to start with the customer experience and work back towards the technology, not the other way around. And it seems that large corporations understand the importance of CX. In today's fast-paced world, customers are making the rules, and their expectations have changed. Customer experience is king. It drives revenue and creates brand advocates. A positive experience can favorably impact sales and is increasingly viewed as a key business goal, so much so that the compensation of executives and line of business leaders is now being tied to CX. And if an interaction is negative, which we'll show today, the damage to a brand can be irreparable. Line of business leaders know CX is important. Board of directors know CX is so important that they're making business leaders personally accountable for providing good CX. But are they also tracking bad CX? We believe that the four most important desires that need to be met for every experience across the customer journey are: it needs to be easy or frictionless, it needs to be timely, users get the right message at the right time for the right channel, it needs to be valuable, what will the user get out of the experience? Will they learn something, save money, satisfy a need? And it needs to be personal. Users expect that the company understands them. The planning, building, and operating these compelling and rewarding experiences would not be possible without the combination of business design and technology. First, all of your interactions need to follow best CX design principles. In addition, all your company systems must be working together to get a true 360-degree view of each person. CX initiatives can't be in silos. Data needs to be integrated. Systems can't be redundant. Your architecture needs to be reviewed. Legacy systems may need to be modernized. Your list of CX initiatives can be daunting. Because poor scores can greatly impact revenue, executives are focusing on how they can improve their CX. They must encourage alignment across the organization in order to improve customer-facing touchpoints and make each interaction easier, personal, timely, and valuable, of course, both digitally and traditionally. They need to understand what they're losing if they don't provide good experiences.
Exactly, and that's because the cost of bad CX is super high, as I'll show you in a bit. When you look at our research at Forrester that we've done over the years, we have a large data pool of data that of customer experience data that I'll explain in a minute. We've done a number of analyses looking at what the cost of bad CX is. For example, we have compared what the 10 case statements of companies that are that are CX leaders that have really high scores in their industry with the statements of companies who have really poor scores in the industry. And we found that compared with the leaders, the customer experience laggards experience 5.1 times slower revenue growth. And that is, put that in context, that is with revenue growth being one of the top goals of executives when we asked them about what keeps them up at night. So 5 times slower revenue growth. The other thing that we've seen is when you look at the different different customers and their experiences, we found that customers with poor experiences have 4.5 times lower willingness to pay a premium for something. And now, even if you're in an industry where you're basically fighting against low price strategy each day, and you might think, what is a premium? You actually have the idea that customers are more price tolerant if the experience is better. So you have more wiggle room with your price as long as it's in some type of tolerance zone. And I'll give you an actual example here. This is not quote unquote just research, but if you go to Las Vegas, you'll find that the Four Seasons Hotel is in the same building as the Mandalay Bay Hotel. And when you look at the prices of the rooms, you find that the 4-star Expedia rated Four Seasons can demand 100% price premium over the five-star Expedia can demand 100% price premium over the 4-star Mandalay Bay hotel. That's huge, right? That's in the same building. And that's that experience that gives it that upside, that price premium. We have also on basis of our customer experience index data done some other analysis that I want to share with you that I think is really interesting. We at Forrester have a customer experience index that measures customer experience quality. I'll just explain briefly how that works. The index score that a company gets is a combination of the customer experience quality that the company provides to customers, weighted by the impact of the customer experience quality dimensions on loyalty, specifically retention, enrichment, and advocacy. The CX quality dimensions that we're looking at are emotion, effectiveness, and ease.
Actually, that seems to map really well to 4 dimensions I mentioned earlier.
Yes, exactly. That's basically our way of saying what are the big buckets of experiences, and it maps really well to what you said, right? You're right about that. So that the ease, the personal, the value, exactly. Yeah. So that's how we measure customer experience quality at Forrester. And what we also find, and this is really, really important to take away, emotions are most important in most of the industries to drive customer loyalty, by the way. So what we do is we have this customer experience index score, and we're looking at how does this customer experience index score relate to the business results? Specifically, we have shown in this methodology that customer experience drives loyalty, drives revenue. And I'll explain in 1 second the results. What we'd always seen was that there is that customer experience drives loyalty, and loyalty is this retention revenue means I spend with a company, continue spending with a company. Enrichment is I buy more, and advocacy is I talk about the company, which leads to new customer relationships. In our customer experience index data, we have data points that help us estimate the revenue impact of that. That's partly based on our CX index survey specifically, but also part on industry assumptions. And for that, we can quantify what it means if customers are having bad experiences that make them less loyal and that make them a risk for revenue. And I'll show you some numbers that I think are pretty mind-boggling here. When you look at the potential revenue loss from customer experience, we did this analysis for 13 industries. What happens if the customer experience index score goes down by 1 point? The potential revenue loss is pretty huge. Here are some numbers for different industries. $224 million for big box retailers. And I'll explain, this is annual potential revenue loss for a company, not for the whole industry, for a company, for a big box retailer. $250 million for an insurance provider, $100 million for a TV service provider, and so on. This is 1 point. We're not talking about a huge swing, but just talking about losing 1 point of customer experience index can have a huge potential revenue impact. So we found a lot of evidence of the cost of bad CX being really high. So Suzanne and I have actually prepared a question for you. And the question that we want to ask you is, do you know the cost of bad CX in your company?
So if you guys can choose 1 to 3 answers to this, and we'll show the poll throughout the webinar. Maxie, as we wait, what ways do some of your clients measure CX? Do they use CSAT scores, NPS? Do you see one way kind of bubbling up to the surface?
We actually, we're a data-driven company, so we asked our clients, and we asked not just our clients, because that would be not doing proper research, but we asked voice of customer professionals, customer experience professionals more generally, what the metrics are that they use to measure customer experience success. And to the top rows with about like 3/4 to 80% NPS and satisfaction. Those are definitely the metrics that, like statistically, we've seen at the top of this list. Effort score is the third. And then there are things like a number of complaints, for example. So it's really interesting that you can see that definitely those metrics that I just mentioned, NPS and CSAT, and also effort score to some degree, are really outperforming the others, which is also something that I've heard anecdotally when I talk to clients about their measurement program. Cool.
Yeah, these are, go ahead, Maxie.
No, it's the poll closed. This is the final result.
Yep.
Yeah, the 4% of you who have an accurate number, will you please call me later? I'd love to talk to you. This is great, wonderful. Also, I can see, and this is also a trend that I see in my conversations with folks in a customer experience role. There's a lot of efforts to try to figure out what the cost of bad CX are. So that's to the 35% of you who say it's somewhat, it's a work in progress. Kudos to you for starting this. And again, there are a lot of companies who are in this phase. But we also see the 62% who do not calculate it, and I think that is probably a data challenge to some degree. And then if you're in the audience and you're not calculating it and you want to share why, please feel free to do so in the chat. But that's also pretty reflective of what I've seen among the folks that I speak to. How about you, Suzanne?
I agree. I think people are being pretty honest with here, saying 35% somewhat. I would have expected more people think they're doing it and they're not, but these are pretty encouraging results, meaning that they know there's a lot of work to do. I think in the past, when we've talked to clients, they think they have it somewhat, and when we dive in, it's lower than they thought. So I think people are trying to realize there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, agreed. Cool. Thank you all for filling that out. We at Forrester have actually done a survey, or Forrester Consulting, really, I should say, has done a study into the cost of bad CX. And Christine, if you get me back into the presentation, then I can show some of the results of that survey. While you're doing that, I'll just quickly talk about that survey. So it's something that it's a survey that the guys from LiquidHub commissioned with us, and we reached out to people in the customer experience role who were decision makers and strong influences in customer experience, and we asked them all about the cost of bad CX, and not just what is the cost of bad CX, but we at Forrester are often very action oriented. What does this mean, right? What should you do based on this? What are the recommendations based on that? So we asked them about the cost of bad CX, what their company leaders and the customer experience professionals were focusing on, and how they were trying to make the case for customer experience. And I want to show you some of those results because I think they're quite interesting. There are a few demographics that I can share with you that you'll see on the slide here. There is a thought leadership paper that LiquidHub is distributing where you find this in more detail. I just wanted to give you, this is an actual survey, right? This is not something that we made up. And you can look at more of those details, more in depth about this respondent profile in the thought leadership paper that I think will be made available to you. But now, what were the results of the survey? And it's really interesting. The results of the survey, first of all, was that the folks leading the CX role were really concerned about delivering bad CX, both about direct as well as indirect financial risks. So you can see the top three concerns here are damaged brand image or perception, decreased customer loyalty, and loss of competitive differentiation or competitive advantage. But directly followed by, for example, reduced share of wallet, which I think is very interesting because that's a metric that's often hard to measure. But that's something that's on the mind of people. Is basically that's revenue churn, right? Somebody doesn't quite do the business with you that they used to do, and then of course also true customer churn. So Suzanne, I think you have a real life example of an organization that recognized a bad customer experience and improved it to stay competitive that you can share with us. So I'll hand it over to you for a second here.
Okay, great, thanks, Maxie. I want to share today a success story from the National Retail Bank, M&T. M&T had a mobile app in the marketplace. And over time, they realized it wasn't meeting their customers' expectations. The M&T had lacked the ability to customize the app, or they didn't have any control over the development roadmap either because they'd implemented a third-party platform. And on top of that, they received feedback in their app store, in their branch locations, and throughout their call centers that their app didn't have the expected features and functionalities of a best-of-breed mobile app. Or, to put in simple words, it wasn't valuable. And on top of it, it wasn't easy. Previously, Their commercial, small business, and personal banking customers had to log out and then log back in with a different username. Most importantly, their customers' poor experiences in this key engagement channel were increasing customer churn. Their customers were switching to other banks, and they directly saw the effect of bad CX on customer retention. So it was great is that they understood the importance of the cost of bad CX, and they asked us to help them reimagine engagement by redesigning their app and creating something that would lead the visual design language for the digital experiences across devices. When they decided to rebuild and redesign the application, they brought in some of the aspects from recent research they're doing around in-branch experiences. It was really important to them that a customer's experience was easy, seamless across all channels, in the store, on the app, and on their site. So what we did, we helped M&T design a new native mobile app that leveraged device-specific interactions across iOS and Android. The functionality was different across those devices in order to keep interactions natural and personalized instead of forced. We also helped push the design cues a bit to take advantage of the standard features that people expect on their mobile phones, especially with a mobile banking application. The app took the digital and visual design language to the next level and set a baseline for how they want to expand their brand across the digital space. By incorporating key user desires, easy, personalized, timely, available, into their new mobile app, they immediately saw an increase in customer satisfaction. And right now, they're taking this design and expanding it also into desktop and a mobile browser.
That's very cool. I can see some of that visual, some of the visuals that you mentioned there. We also have at Forrester, we have a mobile banking functionality benchmark, and some of the things that you'd mentioned came out there as big differentiators in the space. Happy to follow up with a report link to anybody who's interested. Now, what sticks out to me about this example, about this mobile app redesign example, is that requires money, right? It requires time. And when I go back to the survey results, one of the things that stood out to me most from the survey results is that despite the really high cost of bad CX that we saw earlier, CX professionals face pretty big challenges. We asked them about the challenges, and you can summarize them in really three key barriers. The first is a lack of proper technology to support customer experience initiatives. So one of the things that for example, prevents is getting a more holistic picture of the customer, delivering consistent experience across different types of channels, like physical, digital, mobile, but it also prevents an organization from planning and executing and measuring customer experience initiatives. So think about both the technology that is customer facing as well as the technology that enables the customer experience program itself. The second big challenge is the lack of clear strategy. 41% of the customer experience professionals we spoke to that there are too many customer touch points to monitor simultaneously. And 37% said that they feel that they have too many CX initiatives going on at the same time, like 3 to 5 per company, which meant that they couldn't focus properly on each initiative. And not being able to focus is not just a lack of prioritization, but it's also a lack of strategy, which is the root cause of the cause of this is that lack of strategy, because a clear strategy makes prioritization easier. And lastly is a lack of dedicated customer experience staff. Here's always the thing we have to be really careful, right? Providing good CX is not something that is the responsibility of a single team, but it requires participation from every employee across the organization, plus the coordination oversight from a customer experience team. So you have to have this dedicated customer experience team to lead a transformation and organize that team, but you also need to make resources available in the lines of business to collaborate with the customer experience team in improving customer experience initiatives. And the companies that were in the survey found that that's a problem. And by the way, bigger context, that's not something that is specific to the survey. This was actually not a very surprising finding, because we have a common root cause to all of this. And the common root cause is the lack of executive buy-in. When we typically talk about the executive buy-in in the customer experience role, we often get this, yeah, of course we have buy-in and the executives support us, but I think of that more as like a trust exercise. You know, that trust exercise where you fall backwards and somebody's supposed to catch you? That doesn't always happen. So there's a lip service. executive lip service, but not necessarily a follow through. So we're kidding ourselves a bit as CX professionals when we think we have buy-in, because the reality shows us we don't.
So, Maxie, those are some great points. I'm curious as to how many people on the webinar are able to get funding for their CX initiatives. I'd like to pose another question to the audience. So to the audience, we'll put a poll up. How easy is it for you to get executive buy-in for your CX initiatives? We'll give it a minute here to get the poll results.
And nice going there with the uneven scale points. So you have to really make a decision. You can't just be neutral. Oh, even scale points, not uneven.
It looks like we have about 35% that are very easy and somewhat easy, and about 65% that starts getting into the more difficult range.
I bet that the ones that find it very easy probably all have one thing in common, and that is committed executives. Executives that have pushed the initiative off because they understand the importance of customer experience for the business, as opposed to somebody who read a book about customer experience on a long flight and then said, hey, should we do something about it, but forget about it next day. So that's I think what those have in common.
Yeah, and with over 50% of the people who are really finding difficulty getting CX buy-in, what are some of the ways, Max, you think that we can address that?
I think we're getting back to what we talked about here earlier. This idea of the cost of bad CX is actually something that we should be looking into more. And I'll say this: if no matter where you were, if you were a 1, 2, 3, or a 4, even if your CEO is super committed, down the line, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line, there'll be other priorities, other stories that the CEO will hear, and you'll need to follow up on that lack of commitment with a business case. But if you're in one of the kind of in number 3 and 4, you might want to kickstart the business case. And this is the point, right? The cost of bad CX are a catalyst for change, a really important catalyst for change, because given that immense business cost of delivering bad CX, the folks that I speak to, but also the customer experience folks in this survey, see an opportunity to leverage those costs to drive greater support and attention toward customer experience improvements.
Right, and also, what we found too, once we worked in this white paper with you and we saw your results, Maxie, we looked at fear of loss and just some behavioral economics, and it's not new. The notion of using fear to get you to make decisions isn't new at all, but it needs to be used more when rallying executives to get their buy-in for CX projects. In fact, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky came out with the idea of loss aversion in 1979. It's not new, and it explains the fear of loss is more powerful than gain. As you can see here, people have a tendency to prefer avoiding losses as compared to acquiring equivalent gains. What they look at, it's better to not lose $5 to actually gain $5. So in turn, using the fear of revenue loss to gain funding for CX initiatives is far more effective than potential positives or gains.
Yeah, exactly. And we were curious, really truly curious how the people in customer experience role saw this, because this is a really sound theory, but what does it look like in real life? And what we found is that in the survey, in real life, in CX, we see the same. Fear motivates decision makers. In fact, 93% of customer experience professionals that we surveyed in this survey reported that the cost of delivering bad CX, so that fear of loss, played at least some part in driving recent CX investment decisions, and 48% said fear was a key motivator. Also, and this is the other interesting thing here, 80% of customer experience professionals say that they anticipate using the cost of bad CX more commonly as a motivator, so that they can get support for new customer experience investments. And over half of the audience surveyed said that they will use fear of loss significantly more in the future when making the case for customer experience. I think this has to do a little bit with the popularization of the literature on behavioral economics. I mean, who hasn't read a book by Daniel Kahneman or Dan Ariely, or read a blog about it? It's this idea that we're getting more comfortable with. And in this research specifically, what we asked is why they would use the fear of loss. And two things came out as big motivators, or as big drivers of using the fear of loss. The first driver was to drive a greater awareness of the dangers of delivering bad CX. So that can help create longer-term support for customer experience initiatives, transitioning from that lip service I mentioned earlier to be more invested in the long-term CX strategy. And then also, and I think that's the important part that we're getting at in our webinar, in our discussion here, is create more urgency around CX investment decisions. Companies are prone to act much faster if they're confronted with the risk of a substantial loss, as opposed to being promised something, some potential gain that you have. So this loss aversion that Suzanne just talked about, this theory as a human instinct, has been proven useful. Now, here's the thing. Don't get me wrong. People who are in fight or flight modus don't always make the best best decisions. So what does this mean for making investments? We need to be thinking about the different elements of human psychology together. So fear is great to get the attention of executives. I doubt that it will drive CX investments just on its own. Instead, there is a two-pronged approach. The first is inciting with fear, getting metrics around the cost of bad CX to get stakeholders to pay attention, bring it to the table, but then show them what they could gain if they actually follow up. Because beyond just avoiding the loss of bad CX, if you as a big box retailer can lose $224 million by losing a point of CX index score, you can also gain $224 million by winning a point of CX index score. So there is this greed that you can substantiate, that business value, so that you can showcase the positive business outcomes to gain the full support of customer experience professionals. And now here is where I think a really, really important lesson from our survey comes in. If you want to get people to pay attention to this, you not only need to think about that two-punch, fear and greed, you also need to think about what will they be fearful about, and what can you substantiate with greed. We looked at what metrics you can use to convince executives to believe in the cost of bad CX and the cost of good CX, and we found that there was a really, really interesting ranking difference. The loyalty is one thing that's clear, right? That was always a very important metric. But the next most important metric for effectively getting people to buy into the cost of bad CX was reduced share of wallet. So reduced share of wallet was something that worked much better as a risk or as a fear metric than it worked as a greed metric. And that was a really interesting finding. That metric ranked much further down, right, in its effectiveness to prove the benefits of good CX. Also, higher customer acquisition costs and increased customer churn were metrics that were more effective to get people to pay attention to the cost of bad CX than to believe in the benefits of good CX. So if you want to lead with fear, here are some of the metrics that have been more effective for the customer experience professionals we surveyed in getting executives to pay attention to the problem of to the cost of bad CX.
Let me show you now. I want to show you how Subaru is trying to avoid customer churn, and how they're trying to avoid letting their competition take some of their share of wallet. In general, we know that Subaru owners are very loyal. They love the brand. They love Subaru. However, we also know that customer experience has to be across all engagement models, including the new types of interface. Customers right now are purchasing cars not just in security, reliability, or the brand, but also the interface, or the glass and the car or on the device. And cars are so far behind in the interface. People expect their car interface to be comparable to their consumer apps. They expect to be just as good as Facebook, Google, Uber, all the other consumer apps that are easy to use, valuable. And Subaru knew that this new interface could actually open the door to some of their competitors, taking away some of their market share. And they knew that their current app wasn't sufficient. And on top of it, their customers weren't even using it. So to meet their customer demands with easy, timely, personal, valuable, they knew they had to address the situation. They immediately involved LiquidHub to perform research to first better understand their customers' needs, what the right interface was, and the right services to include in their app. From this research, Subaru focused on several goals of the redesign. First, they wanted to improve the ease of Subaru ownership, meaning maintenance, all the general things you see, how to make your life with a Subaru easier. They also want to improve safety. So they added such features as monitored driving experiences, geofencing, speed alerts, curfews. Subaru is a lot of times a family car. How can you improve the safety? They also wanted to improve entertainment or the multimedia, such as various music choices, ways to find restaurants, points of interest, or even easy parking. Currently, Generation 1 is in the App Store, but Subaru knows that this is only phase 1 of the project. We're going to continue to increase the ease of ownership, extend safety features, and expand their multimedia partnerships. Subaru knows how demanding CX is for consumer interfaces. We're going to transition the end user to the experts, Apple and Google, and use Apple Car and Android Auto to provide Subaru owners with the best possible CX, in addition to the safest, most fun car on the road today.
That's a really cool example, especially for me, because I'm in the process of buying a new car. I'm thinking about a Subaru. Just don't tell our dealer, otherwise they'll not give us a good price if I seem too eager. Yeah, but this is a great example of not only the idea of trying to reduce the risk to share of wallet, but also the idea of creating an ecosystem or partaking in an ecosystem that's already there, go where customers already are. So thank you for that great example. Now Suzanne mentioned earlier, I lead the research and measurement. So one of the questions that I asked myself about all of this, we know cost of bad CX, we know we want to lead with fear, substantiate with greed, but can we actually measure the cost of bad CX? And you'd mentioned earlier, right, that's a problem. We also asked this question because I was interested in it in the survey. And what we found is that most companies are not measuring the negative impact on CX for those metrics they're most concerned about. In this graphic, what you see is, in the blue bars is companies that they measure this, and in the gray bars, companies who consider this a top 5 concern of delivering bad CX. So you can see that, for example, for damaged brand image and perception, 3/4 of companies think this is really crucial, but only just about half are really measuring it. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, increased churn, nearly 2/3 are measuring it, but only 45% think it's important. So there's a disconnect about the different metrics that we have and the metrics that we should have. Now we talked about different things, right? We talked about cost of bad CX is important, lead with fear, substantiate with greed, measure the right thing. What are some recommendations to take away from this? What do you need to do now? As you look at at driving greater awareness for the cost of delivering bad customer experience, we recommend the following 3 things. The first is to revamp your metrics to help make the case going forward. You probably saw that one coming after the analysis that you just saw on the last slide. So define metrics that measure how customers perceive their experiences, but also what happens in those experiences. And then, and this is important, the customer economics. So what customer actions take because of their what actions the customers take because of their experiences, which in turn affects business success. And that way you can tie customer experience to the outcomes. And in this case, right, the important outcomes that you know that you should be most concerned about as a company when it comes to bad CX. The second recommendation is showing how bad CX puts in jeopardy what executives treasure. This is taking a leaf out of the theory of loss. You could make probably 20 business cases for customer experience, but only a few of them will resonate with executives. They will resonate with their passions, things that they care about, their biases. Like somebody, for example, a CFO turned CEO will have very different approach to the right metrics and what's important than a line of business leader turned CEO who has a implicit bias towards a certain type of customer or a certain type of go-to-market. And then there are also, of course, the pet projects or the kind of the important things of the day. Think chatbots, AI in digital transformation, right? That will certainly get people to pay attention. But also the idea of looking at where is the company in a life cycle? Are we in a growth phase? So is it really about market share, or are we in a decline phase where it's important to keep the cash flow up and try to maximize profitability? So show how, once you find out what executives treasure, you can show how bad CX puts that into jeopardy. So last recommendation is make the case for initiatives that avoid the cost of bad CX. And this is the point you made earlier. Do not just try to put the fear of bad CX into executives' minds, because the next thing that they'll ask you is, so what should we do about this if you've done it right? That's what you want. This is basically where you want to end up. You want to end up with 2 to 3 projects that relate to the key drivers of customer experience that you know, and identify those projects that will help improve performance on the drivers. I wouldn't ask for too much. We've seen lots of experiments on the complexity of choice. We've seen that people pick the wrong retirement plans if they get faced with too much choice, and your executives will do the same. So show them, here are the 3 key drivers, and here are the 3 to 4 main priorities that we should be following up. Here are the initiatives. Here's an ROI for those initiatives based on the benefits of CX that we've just shown, and then suggest that list.
Thanks, Maxie. These 3 are really critical. And what I wanted to do is talk about a company that's taken these recommendations to heart. A Ford Motor Company wanted to improve their CX. So what they realized they need to do is they need to revamp their metrics around CX. And so they're no longer depending on just surveys and CSAT scores to understand customer experience and opinions. They actually added a new element in. And they first started with getting better research. So research is imperative to better CX. And they found it's not just for pre-purchase, but also post-purchase. They formed a group to focus on early ownership, which is a crucial time period for customer retention in the auto industry. So Ford used an in-depth qualitative research program. It's called the 90-Day Drive Program. It was designed to show the positive and negative reactions to interactions with Ford post-period. So this post-purchase 90-Day Drive Program transformed empathy into insights. A day-by-day, sometimes even minute-by-minute view into the new car ownership. Vehicle purchases are important decisions for customers. Therefore, the communications from the company, specific Ford, during this period are the most crucial for retention and to make sure they hold that share of wallet, and also hopefully increase retention. They found that they need to improve how they track and monitor all different types of communication from different departments within Ford. And what they found is they need to narrow down the various types of communication. And they also found they had a great return in changing that type into being more personal and strategic with that communications. In fact, now, one of their goals for every customer is to receive a personalized handwritten note mailed to their house that thanks them for their purchase. Just that one change through the research and through the actual interaction from an executive to a car owner made a great impact on loyalty with that brand. By investing in this initiative, Ford has decreased the bad CX for the customers in the experiences they had post-purchase. So full with this, we also open up a Q&A. And so if everyone, we have a few questions already, but if more people want to put in their questions in, and we'll address them to either myself and or Maxie. One question that we got about midway through was, we are not measuring the cost of bad CX at all in our organization. How do we start, and what should be the first metric we measure?
That's a good question. I hope that you said this question came midway through. I hope that throughout the presentation, one thing became clear. There are some metrics that are more more important when it comes to that fear factor. But when it comes to the cost of bad CX, the metrics that will resonate most are the metrics that are dear to executives. So that last recommendation, right, going to what executives treasure. And that's where I would start. How does bad CX affect those? For example, we had a CEO, and this is now not part of the survey. This is an anecdote from my research. A CEO who was not very interested in customer experience, but the team started to show him. It was a man. The team started to show him how the competitor started to invest in customer experience, and the perception of that company started to slip compared to competitors. Which you might even say this is not like truly cost of bad CX, but that's exactly that brand perception that we talked about earlier, and that got them the buy-in. But that was not just because brand perception is important. That was also because the CEO was extremely competitive. Right, so if you think back to how does your CEO think? Where in the business life cycle are you as a company? Where what are the CEO's passions, and what business model do you have? You can figure out some of that. Also, and this is probably a little bit more familiar to the ones in a customer experience role, when you do on a more granular basis, if you understand what the most important journeys are that your customers are having, and you map those journeys, and then look at how bad CX affects the journeys, you often find that it affects both the top line. So, for example, a customer might not buy something, might abandon a cart, and you also find that it affects the bottom line. A customer might not be able to complete something online and might then call into the call center and cost you $6 to $12 per call, and that's then the bottom line effect directly. So those are the two, right? What do executives treasure, and then along the customer journey, how does bad CX affect some of those top and bottom line metrics?
That's really interesting, Maxie, and I love the anecdote with the CEO. I mean, and I think that builds on some ways the next question of, how do we start, which the first metric be? Because we also talked about empathy, and the question here, I'm kind of scroll down a little bit, is how do you measure empathy and emotion when looking at CX?
Yeah, I mentioned that measuring. Let me think about it. Like, emotion is a really important part in the customer experience, and I think that most companies are not really good at measuring that. We have proxies like CSAT, for example, but we see some companies experimenting more with emotions, and I'm talking about truly innovative things like mouse movements to measure emotion. Really, really interesting. We can show some of that, or in the call center, voice analysis to identify distress. Down to the more not normal, but more common things like measuring emotions through text analysis. Those are all ways we do that. Keep in mind though, and this is important, this is not about measuring emotion. This is about identifying what the top emotions are that you want to evoke in your customers. So think about feeling valued, for example, or feeling respected, feeling like they can trust you, and what are the top emotions that you need to avoid at all times. Think about frustration, anger, contempt, and then measuring those. Right, so this is a very targeted way to measure emotion, and I mentioned it earlier, in a call center, in a support, you want to look at distress, for example.
That's great, Maxie. That answers it for me, at least. I hope that answers to the person who wrote in the question also. I want to change gears a little bit here with another question that came in with. The question is, are companies becoming more proactive in measuring CX?
That question is probably based on some of what we know about measurement, that often measurement is kind of an after-the-fact thing. And we've seen some interesting developments in predictive analytics, for example, where companies are using profile data of customers. Independence, for example, a health insurance company, they use profile information from customers, transaction data from customers, so have they called before, for example, and notes from call center calls to predict who will complain about the health insurance. And now that means we have an idea of who will complain before they complain. So we don't have to measure like how happy were you, but we can reach out proactively. And by we, I mean anybody who does this. I can reach out proactively. Once you've done this and predicted the experience, you're able to close the loop before the survey has even gone out. So that's the type of more proactive measurement that I see becoming more prominent, but it's still in its infancy because it requires quite a lot of data, and also predictive analytics is still very much a black box that people still feel like, can we trust this? And probability is 80% that this person was unhappy. Should we really act on this? So there's some challenges with that, but we definitely see measurement moving away, from being so bitterly reactive, but also away from being something that you measure, that you put in a report, then you read it out, nobody looks at it, and you're done, right? But from becoming more embedded in the way that we make decisions.
That makes sense. And you showed, and one question here says, you showed us earlier that losing a point of CX index can be $224 million in revenue. This was shown for the big box retailers, for everyone who didn't follow. Now, I know that some of the big box retailers have high scores and some have low scores in the CX. Is the same drop in revenue for both?
That is actually a good question. So something that I omitted for simplicity's sake is that, and simplicity's sake, right, it's actually really a really important finding, is that the relationship between customer experience and revenue is by no means always linear. In some industries, and those are the ones that you find on that slide, because that's where a point of win is also a point of loss, you can find that that linear relationship, a lockstep relationship. So we had talked about the big box retailers as one example of that, right? We had also talked about the that TV providers, insurance providers, as an example of linear shapes. There are also industries, however, where the relationship between customer experience and revenue is not linear, but where it's diminishing. Think about wireless service providers. And diminishing means that if you slip in CX, your revenue loss will actually increase over time. So the more you slip, the over proportionally bigger your revenue loss will be. So you slip 1 point, the revenue loss might be $200 million, but you slip 2 points in revenue loss, might then not be 400, but $600 million. And that's really important to keep in mind. There are also some where the opposite is true, where it's an exponential relationship. So just slipping a little bit on the top end of that CX index score has a huge drop in revenue. So that's an interesting relationship. There's a for those of you who are more visual, there is a Forrester report out there that's called Drive Revenue with Great Customer Experience that shows that relationship. And I'm sure we're happy to follow up with a link to that report for Forrester clients, at least to access.
Thanks, Maxie. Moving on to the next question, it says here, we don't have one team that owns CX in our organization. It's split between marketing, IT, and sales. How do we get all the departments on the same page to measure CX?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. I'm not sure that there's always a great solution for this. That's like a quote unquote silver bullet. We do find that companies that are successful in this are creating some shared accountability between departments. So if everybody in in those departments is responsible for customer experience, they're also interested in being able to measure it well. Right? So creating a shared accountability is one thing. The other thing is that we also find that the different departments are responsible for different parts of the experience. So they might be more interested when it comes to measuring customer experience, to measure the customer experience that they influence. And if they're internal departments, how they influence how the frontline folks can drive customer experience.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting, Maxie. We get this quite often with some of our clients too, and it's almost like a two-part question: is how do you not just give them the same page to measure CX and to get on the same page, but also how do you make them all feel like they own CX? And we found that by, you know, it's really empathy. And if you can get all of the groups to be empathetic to their customers or brokers or members or whoever the people are that matter most to them, if we can get them to be empathetic across the board, people naturally become more accountable. So that's one way we feel like we can get everyone more on the same page.
Yeah, and I think that plays to a very important point. Customer experience isn't something that you can, or customer centricity isn't something you create with a stick approach. If people don't want to act a certain way, they won't. And when you look away, that they will not do the things that they need to do. If you, but however, create the sense of purpose, the sense of why is it important to create a good experience, help them to figure out what their contribution is to creating a bigger experience, then we're talking about a behavior change. Because mostly people don't behave people don't behave customer uncentric because they want to harm the customer. They behave like that because they either don't know how their actions influence the customer, or because they don't know how to do it differently.
Yeah, I agree. I think we might have time for one or two more questions. This one just came in. It says, I'll read this. Has social media increased the immediacy and permanency of bad customer experience? How can a company overcome that?
Suzanne, what do you see in your clients?
Yeah, I definitely, yes, it's definitely, I mean, it's really all the new engagement channels have made this a bit more complex, and it goes viral that much faster. And in some ways, it seems more permanent. And I think it goes back. I feel like I'm repeating myself here at the last one, but how can you, overcome that? Well, if the entire company has an empathetic approach, let's say it's like United. That was pretty horrible with someone, filming someone being dragged off a plane and having it filmed. But I think what the CEO did is he at first he wasn't accountable. And he tried to point the blame somewhere else, and social media just beat him up. I think if he was empathetic to that customer and admitted that there was some, missteps in that, I think it's still been viral, but it might have died down a little bit more. And I think even that CEO wasn't made, correct if I'm wrong, something is being promoted to something on the board, and the board lost that. So I think one is, having across the entire company, having more empathy is one way to manage it. And then there's also other ways. Social listening, there's all different ways of social listening, so you can address it more quickly. You can even do AI with tone analysis within the social listening to find, and you can do certain word tracking. And like what you said earlier, Maxie, is, what emotions are important, and what are you tracking around emotions, around social listening?
Yeah, and I think that point that you made, that listening, and not just listening, but we see quite a lot of hotels do that. You've seen this, right, where somebody replies to your review. And then also, and this is the other thing, if people who are unhappy go on social media, and you want to balance that out, that you need to get more people on social media who are happy. So here's the idea that some of the survey vendors or customer feedback management platforms, more broadly, are doing they often have functionality that lets you prompt customers to post a review, and not just good reviews, but both, right? So that you increase the level of reviews overall to match, and then bring that often also brings in more positive reviews. And so that's one way that I've seen companies try to overcome this, basically getting reacting in a public way, and B, getting more people to also share when they've had good experiences.
Yeah, I agree, Maxie. I think we only have about a few minutes left, so the questions that we didn't respond to, we'll respond by email. I really want to thank everyone for attending the Cost of Bad CX webinar, and I especially want to thank Maxie for joining us today and co-leading the development of the white paper, The Cost of Bad CX. Here at LiquidHub, we focus on reimagining engagement, and we're happy to help you with both how to, get CX initiatives supportive to your company, and especially how to create more compelling experiences. We recorded this webinar, so we'll put it up on our website. We'll be sending everyone who registered a link, and we'll also be mailing out the white paper to everyone on the call. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions and comments. And again, Maxie, thank you so much for all your help. It's been a really fun research project, and it's been great working with you.
Well, thank you. Same, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone. And those 4%, don't forget to ask me to tell me about it. Have a good day. Bye.